10:47 in the morning. November 14th, 1944. The aircraft boneyard at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. Marcus Kellerman stood in the middle of a graveyard of broken machines. Around him, the twisted aluminium skeletons of dead aircraft sat rotting in the tropical sun. Douglas Dauntless dive bombers with their tails shot off. Grumman Wildcats missing wings. The air smelled like hydraulic fluid and rust, like oil baking on hot metal. The wind coming off the ocean carried salt and the faint chemical tang of aviation fuel that had soaked into the earth over months. Flint, that's what everyone called him, Marcus Flint Kellerman, walked slowly through the debris field. His boots crunched on broken glass and metal shavings. He was 23 years old, lean, quiet, the kind of man who spent more time looking at things than talking about them. He stopped in front of Douglas Dauntless, tail number 4728. The fuselage looked like someone had taken a giant can opener to it. Bullet holes the size of fists. The canopy was shattered, dried blood on the instrument panel. He climbed onto the wing. The metal groaned. He peered into the gun bay where the aircraft's defensive armament had been mounted. There, an AN/M2 Browning machine gun, 30 caliber, still bolted into its cradle. Flint reached in and put his hand on the barrel. The metal was cold despite the Hawaiian heat. His fingers traced the receiver, the bolt assembly, the feed mechanism. This wasn't the same gun the infantry carried. This was different, lighter, faster, built for aircraft, built for killing at 20,000 feet and 300 miles per hour. Flint had been looking for this specific gun for 3 months. Most people think battlefield innovation happens by accident, lucky breaks, random inspiration. That's not how it works. Flint didn't stumble onto this idea. He planned it, researched it, hunted for it. And he hunted because 11 months earlier, in November of 1943, 1,009 United States Marines had died on a beach called Tarawa. They died in 76 hours of fighting. They died because the weapons they carried couldn't punch through reinforced concrete. The Japanese had spent 2 years building bunkers on that island, concrete pillboxes with walls 3 feet thick, steel-reinforced firing slits. The Marines had M1 Garand rifles, excellent weapons, accurate, reliable, but a Garand couldn't crack a concrete bunker. The 30-06 round would spark off the surface and ricochet into the sand. They had Browning automatic rifles, the BAR. Heavier firepower, but still not enough. To kill a pillbox, you needed a bazooka or a flamethrower, and to use those, you had to get close, 30 yards, maybe 50, which meant running across open ground, across beach sand, with no cover, while machine guns cut you to pieces. The math was simple and brutal. At Tarawa, 70% of the bazooka teams died before they could fire a shot. Now, intelligence reports said Iwo Jima was worse. The Japanese had spent 20 years fortifying that island, 20 years pouring concrete, 20 years digging tunnels into volcanic rock. Flint knew what that meant. More bunkers, stronger bunkers, more Marines dying because their rifles couldn't do the job. So 3 months ago, Flint had started reading maintenance reports, aircraft loss records, salvage inventories. He'd found documentation on Douglas Dauntless number 4728, shot down during a training accident, cannibalized for parts but not fully scrapped. The report mentioned the wing guns were still in place. Flint had memorized the boneyard grid coordinates. And now, 3 months later, he was standing on the wing of that exact aircraft, looking at the exact gun he'd been searching for. He began to unbolt it from its mount. Marcus Kellerman was born in Akron, Ohio, in 1921. His father, Hugh Kellerman, was a blacksmith. Not the kind who shoed horses. Those days were mostly gone by the 20s. Hugh worked industrial metal. He repaired factory equipment, punch presses, stamping machines, the big, ugly iron beasts that ran the rubber plants and manufacturing shops that kept Akron alive. Flint grew up in that shop. The smell of coal smoke and hot iron was his childhood. He learned to read metal the way other kids learn to read books. He learned that steel has a voice when you hit it with a hammer. that you can tell if a weld is good or bad by the color of the slag. In 1933, when Flint was 11 years old, a crane cable snapped in his father's shop. A half-ton steel beam swung loose and crushed Hugh Kellerman against a wall. He died before the ambulance arrived. Flint's mother tried to keep the family together, but this was 1933. The Depression had Akron by the throat. Factories were closing, shops were boarding up. There was no work, no money.
Flint had a younger sister, Roslyn. She'd been born with a condition the doctors called spastic paralysis. Her legs didn't work right. She couldn't walk without help. At 13 years old, Marcus Kellerman became the man of the house. He dropped out of school. He started scavenging. He'd walk the alleys behind closed factories and pull metal out of trash bins. Copper wire, aluminium scrap, anything he could sell. He'd fix broken tools and sell them at the flea market. He'd take apart old radios and rebuild them. And when Roslyn turned 7, and the doctor said she'd need a wheelchair for the rest of her life, and the wheelchair cost more money than the family would see in a year, Flint built one. He built it from a bicycle frame and baby carriage wheels and scrap steel he'd collected over 6 months. He built a brake system from Model T parts. He padded the seat with fabric his mother salvaged from old coats. It took him 4 months. He worked on it every night after his scrap runs, by lamplight in the garage. When he was finished, it wasn't pretty. It was heavy and crude, and the wheels squeaked. But Roslyn could move herself. She could go where she wanted without being carried. His mother cried when she saw it. Roslyn just smiled and rolled herself down the sidewalk for the first time in her life. That's when Flint learned the most important lesson of his life. Broken things aren't garbage. They're opportunities. If you look at a pile of junk and see only trash, you'll stay poor and helpless forever. But if you look at that same pile and see components, materials, solutions, then you can build anything. Flint carried that philosophy with him when he joined the Marines in 1942. He carried it through boot camp, through advanced infantry training, through the voyage to Hawaii and the months of preparation for the next invasion. And in October of 1944, that philosophy saved his life before the shooting even started. The training exercise was called Concrete Beach. The Marine brass had built it based on intelligence from Tarawa. They'd poured a concrete pillbox, an exact replica of a Japanese defensive position, on the rifle range at Schofield Barracks. 3 feet of reinforced concrete, a firing slit 8 inches wide and 6 inches tall, steel plating around the aperture. Flint's platoon, 40 Marines, was told to assault it. They had live ammunition, M1 Garands, bars, 1 bazooka team. The instructors wanted them to understand, in their bones, what they'd be facing. The whistle blew. The platoon charged. 40 Marines, sprinting across 200 yards of open sand, firing as they ran. The rifles cracked. Muzzle flashes lit up the morning. Spent brass arced through the air and clinked onto the sand. The bullets hit the pillbox and bounced. Every single round sparked off the concrete and whined away into the dirt. Some of them hit the steel plate around the firing slit and ricocheted straight back toward the Marines. One man took a fragment in the shoulder from his own bullet. The BAR gunners opened up. Long, sustained bursts. The heavier .30 caliber rounds hammered the concrete in groups, concentrated fire, trying to crack the surface. Nothing. Not even a chip, just sparks and dust and the angry whine of metal deflecting off stone. The bazooka team went to one knee, loaded, aimed, fired. The rocket hit the pillbox dead center. The explosion was enormous. Fire and black smoke rolled across the beach. When the smoke cleared, there was a scorch mark on the concrete. That's all, a scorch mark. The pillbox was intact. The gunnery sergeant blew the whistle. Exercise over. He gathered the platoon in the shade and spoke in the flat, tired voice of a man who'd seen too many young Marines die. "Gentlemen," he said, "your rifles are useless against a fortified position. The enemy knows this. On Iwo Jima, they will be sitting in bunkers just like this one, and they will wait for you to get close enough to use explosives or a flamethrower. That means you will have to cross 50 to 70 yards of open beach with no cover while they shoot at you. Statistically,
60 to 70% of you will be killed or wounded before you reach effective range. This is not pessimism. This is mathematics. The only way to reduce casualties is speed and violence of action. Move fast, stay aggressive, and pray. Flint sat in the sand and did the math in his head. 40 men in the platoon, 60 to 70% casualties meant 24 to 28 dead or wounded. Just to get close enough to blow up one bunker, and intelligence said there were hundreds of bunkers on Iwo Jima. He looked at the men around him. These were his friends, the guys he ate with,
The guys he played cards with, the guys who wrote letters home to their families and showed pictures of their girlfriends and talked about what they'd do after the war. In 6 months, most of them would be dead. Not because they were cowards, not because they lacked training, but because they didn't have the right tool for the job. That night, Flint couldn't sleep. The numbers kept running through his head. 60 to 70%. 24 to 28 men. Dead or dying. At 2 a.m. he got up, pulled on his boots, walked across the dark base to the infirmary tent. Inside, 3 Marines from the training exercise, wounded by their own ricochets. The bullets that had bounced off the concrete pillbox. One of them, Private Eddie Morrison, 19 years old, from Des Moines, Iowa, had taken a fragment in the abdomen. The doctors had him on a cot. They'd given him morphine. It wasn't enough. He was still screaming. Flint stood in the shadows and watched the doctors work, watched Morrison thrash and cry, watched them increase the morphine until his screams became moans. Morrison's eyes found Flint across the tent. The kid grabbed at the air, trying to reach him. Flint walked over, knelt beside the cot. Morrison grabbed his arm, gripped it hard. His fingers were cold and wet. "Don't," Morrison whispered. "Don't let this happen on the real beach." The kid's eyes were wide, terrified. He knew he was dying from a training accident, killed by his own bullet bouncing off concrete. "I won't," Flint said. Morrison died at 3:17 a.m. Flint walked out of that tent knowing 3 things. 1. Training accidents were killing Marines. 2. The real battle would be worse, much worse. 3. Unless someone changed the mathematics, most of the men in his platoon would be dead by spring. He walked to the boneyard, started looking for answers in the wreckage. The problem was firepower, specifically sustained, overwhelming firepower that could be delivered from a distance. The M1 Garand was a beautiful weapon, semi-automatic, accurate out to 500 yards. But it fired 1 round at a time, 8 rounds in a clip, then reload. It was a rifle for picking off individual targets, not for smashing concrete. The BAR was better. It could fire full auto, 500 rounds per minute. But that number was misleading. 500 rounds per minute sounds fast until you break it down. That's 8.3 rounds per second, which means there's a gap of about 0.12 seconds between each bullet. That gap is everything. A good soldier, and the Japanese soldiers were very good, can use that gap. When a BAR opens up, you drop behind cover. You count the rhythm. Blam, 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 blam. You wait for the pause when the gunner runs dry and has to reload. Then you move. You shift position. You pop up somewhere else. You fire back. The BAR created a rhythm, and rhythm can be exploited. The Japanese had figured this out. Their defensive doctrine was built around it. They'd position 2 or 3 pillboxes in a triangle, mutually supporting, with overlapping fields of fire. When a Marine squad attacked one pillbox, the other pillboxes would open up from the flanks. The Marines would go to ground. The BAR gunner would try to suppress one position, but while he was focused on that target, the other positions would maneuver. It was chess, brutal, bloody chess, and the Japanese were very good at it. Flint realized the only way to break that system was to eliminate the gaps, to fire so fast that there was no rhythm, no pause, just a continuous stream of lead that made it physically impossible for the enemy to move or think or do anything except die. He needed a weapon that fired not 500 rounds per minute, but more than twice that. He needed an aircraft machine gun. The AN/M2 Browning. The gun mounted in the wings of fighter planes fired 1,200 rounds per minute.
That's a bullet every 0.05 seconds. No gaps, no rhythm, just a solid beam of violence. But aircraft guns were built for aircraft. They were designed to be cooled by the slipstream at 20,000 feet. They were fired in short bursts from a stable platform. They were triggered by electrical solenoids, not manual triggers. You couldn't just pick one up and use it like a rifle. Flint took the idea to the company armorer, a master sergeant named Voss. Voss was a career Marine. 22 years in, he'd seen everything, fixed everything. Flint explained his idea. Use an AN/M2, mount it with a stock, rig a manual trigger, create a portable, shoulder-fired weapon with aircraft-level firepower. Voss looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Kellerman," Voss said, "that gun fires 1,200 rounds a minute. You fire that from your shoulder, the recoil is going to rip your arm off. You'll be on the ground in 2 seconds with a dislocated shoulder and the gun 10 feet away. Second, it'll eat ammunition faster than you can feed it. You'll burn through 100 rounds in 5 seconds. You'll be empty before the fight even starts. Third, that barrel is thin. It's designed to be cooled by wind at 300 miles an hour. On the ground, it'll overheat in 30 seconds and warp. You'll melt the rifling and the gun will be scrap." Voss crossed his arms. "Stick to your garand, Kellerman. This isn't a junkyard. This is the Marine Corps." Flint walked out of the armory and went back to his bunk. He sat on the edge of the cot and pulled out a small notebook. Leather cover. It had been his father's. Hugh Kellerman had used it to sketch designs for metalwork projects. Now Flint used it for the same thing. He opened to a blank page and started drawing. On the night of November 17th, 1944, Flint lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Eddie Morrison, about the kid's last words, "Don't let this happen on the real beach." He thought about Roslyn, about the wheelchair he'd built from junk, about his father's voice, "Tools don't fail, son. People just use the wrong tool for the job." At 2 a.m., Flint got out of bed. He pulled on his boots and walked across the base to the boneyard. The guard at the gate knew him. Flint had been coming here for weeks, scavenging parts, fixing things. The guard waved him through. Flint walked to the Douglas Dauntless. He climbed onto the wing. He pulled out a wrench and started unbolting the AN/M2 from its mount. It took 40 minutes to get the gun free. It was heavier than he expected. 23 pounds without ammunition. The metal was cold and slick with old grease. He carried it back to the maintenance shed, laid it on a workbench, turned on a lamp, and started working. The first problem was the trigger mechanism. The aircraft gun used an electrical solenoid. A button on the pilot's control stick sent current through a wire which activated a switch which released the firing pin. Simple, elegant, completely useless if you didn't have an electrical system. Flint needed to build a mechanical trigger, something he could pull with his finger. He pulled the solenoid assembly out. He studied the firing mechanism, the sear, the hammer, the disconnector. He sketched it in his notebook. Then he went to the scrap bin and found a piece of spring steel from a damaged rifle. Over the next 6 hours, he fabricated a trigger assembly. He cut the steel, shaped it, drilled holes for the pivot pin. He tested the action 100 times, pulling the makeshift trigger, listening to the click of the hammer. Too stiff. He filed down the spring. Too loose. He bent it back. At 8 a.m., he had a working trigger. Crude, ugly, but functional. The second problem was the stock. The AN/M2 had no stock. It was just a receiver and barrel. There was nothing to brace against your shoulder. Flint went back to the boneyard and found a broken M1 Garand. He sawed off the wooden stock, took it back to the shop. He drilled holes through the wood and bolted it onto the back of the aircraft gun's receiver. It looked insane, like 2 different weapons welded together in a car crash. But when Flint lifted it and pressed the stock into his shoulder, it felt solid, stable. He could control it. The third problem was the front grip. The barrel of the AN/M2 was smooth. There was nothing to hold onto. If he tried to fire it, the muzzle climb would send the barrel straight up into the air. He found a damaged BAR in the scrap pile. He cut off the bipod. the folding legs that the BAR gunner used to stabilize the weapon on the ground. He welded the bipod onto the barrel shroud of the aircraft gun. Now he had something to grip. And when he deployed the bipod legs, he could brace the gun on the ground and fire from a prone position. The fourth problem was ammunition. The AN/M2 fed from a belt, a long, flexible belt of linked cartridges that fed into the gun from an ammo can. But aircraft ammo cans held 600 rounds and weighed 40 pounds. He couldn't carry that. Flint needed a portable magazine, something he could reload quickly. He went to the sheet metal shop and fabricated a box from aluminum. He designed it to hold 100 rounds in a folded belt. The box attached to the left side of the receiver. It was awkward and heavy, but it worked. By November 20th, 1944, Flint had a working prototype. He called it the Stinger. It weighed 23 pounds loaded. It looked like a nightmare. The welding was rough. The parts didn't match. It was a Frankenstein's monster of a weapon, cobbled together from 3 different guns and a pile of scrap. But when Flint racked the charging handle and felt the bolt slam forward, he knew it would work. He just had to prove it. The test range was empty at 6 a.m. Flint walked out onto the firing line with the Stinger cradled in his arms. He'd brought 200 rounds of 30 caliber ammunition. He'd loaded the box magazine himself, feeding each round into the belt by hand, checking the links, making sure nothing would jam. He set up a target, a wooden frame with sandbags stacked in front of it, not concrete, but enough to simulate resistance. Flint went prone, extended the bipod, pressed the stock into his shoulder, wrapped his hand around the grip, rested his finger on the homemade trigger. He took a breath and pulled. The Stinger erupted. The sound was unlike anything Flint had ever heard. Not the crack of a rifle, not even the hammering of a BAR. This was a tearing noise, like someone had taken a giant piece of canvas and was ripping it in half. A continuous scream that vibrated in his chest and made his teeth ache. The recoil hammered into Flint's shoulder. The bipod legs dug into the dirt. The barrel climbed, but he fought it down, leaning his weight forward, muscling the muzzle back on target. He held the trigger for 3 seconds. 60 rounds. The target didn't just get holes in it, it disintegrated. The sandbags exploded into clouds of sand. The wooden frame splintered into toothpicks. The sheer volume of lead hitting the target turned it into dust. Flint released the trigger. The barrel was glowing, a faint orange heat shimmer rising off the metal. The air smelled like burned gunpowder and hot steel. He stood up. His shoulder ached. His ears were ringing despite the cotton he'd stuffed in them. But he was smiling. The Stinger worked. The morning after the test, Flint returned to his footlocker to get his gear for morning formation. There was something new inside. An envelope, plain, no markings. He opened it. Inside was a note, typed, no signature. Supply shed 12, midnight to night. More materials available if needed. Someone is watching who agrees with you. Flint read it 3 times. Then he burned it. That night, at midnight, he walked to supply shed 12. The door was unlocked. Inside, the shed was dark. He turned on a flashlight. On the workbench, 3 more AN/M2 barrels, a welding kit, steel stock, bipods, everything he'd need to build more Stingers. And a second note. The math says Marines are going to die. Your math says fewer. Build more. I'll handle the paperwork if anyone asks. Don't look for me. Just build. Flint never learned who left the supplies, but someone high enough to access restricted equipment believed in what he was doing. Someone who'd seen the same math, the same death toll. Someone who understood that sometimes you have to break the rules to save lives. Over the next 2 weeks, Flint refined the design. He reinforced the welds. He adjusted the trigger pull. He built 3 more Stingers, and he recruited 3 men to use them. Everett Dunbar, 26 years old, a welder from Amarillo, Texas. Everyone called him Wolf because of his habit of howling at the moon when he got drunk. Wolf understood metalwork. He understood why the Stinger mattered. He looked at Flint's creation and said, "That's the ugliest beautiful thing I've ever seen." Silas Ramsey, 19, a farm kid from North Platte, Nebraska. The strongest man in the platoon. He could carry the Stinger and 200 rounds of ammo without slowing down. He didn't talk much, just nodded when Flint showed him how it worked and said, "I'll carry it." Irving Castellano, 21, a mechanic from Brooklyn. Sharp, quick. He picked up the manual of arms for the Stinger in an afternoon. Everyone called him Rook because he played chess like a grandmaster. Rook looked at the weapon and said, "This is going to change the game."
Flint didn't ask for permission. He didn't file paperwork. He didn't tell the officers. He just built the guns and trained the men and kept his mouth shut. The four of them would meet at night in an abandoned Quonset hut. They'd practice loading, clearing jams, field stripping the weapons in the dark. Flint taught them everything. How to recognize when the barrel was getting too hot, how to time their bursts to conserve ammunition, how to use the Stinger's devastating rate of fire without wasting rounds. They became a crew, a brotherhood, 4 men who knew they were carrying weapons that weren't supposed to exist, 4 men who decided that regulations mattered less than keeping their friends alive. On February 18, 1945, Flint and the 3 others boarded an LST, a landing ship, tank, bound for Iwo Jima. They carried their Stingers wrapped in canvas, disguised as damaged BARs being sent for repair. No one asked questions. And the next morning, when the ramps dropped and the Marines charged onto the black sand beach, Marcus Flint Kellerman stepped into hell, carrying a weapon that wasn't supposed to exist. A weapon he'd built from junk. A weapon that was about to change the mathematics of death. 9:02 in the morning, February 19th, 1945. Beach. Red 1. Iwo Jima. The sand was black. Not grey, not dark brown. Black like coal dust. Volcanic ash compacted over millennia into a beach that looked like the shore of hell itself. And when you stepped on it, your boot sank. 4 inches. 6 inches. Like trying to run through a pile of loose flour. Every step was a fight against the earth trying to swallow you. Flint was 50 yards inland. His platoon, what was left of it, was pinned down behind a low ridge of volcanic rock. Behind them, the ocean. Ahead, 200 yards of open ground rising toward the airfield. And between here and there, the pillboxes, concrete bunkers, low domes of reinforced stone with firing slits like the eyes of dragons. The Japanese had built them during 20 years of occupation. They'd poured the concrete 3 feet thick. They'd sunk them deep into the ash so only the top 18 inches showed above ground. They'd positioned them in overlapping fields of fire so that if you attacked one, 2 others could shoot you from the sides. The Marines had been on the beach for 8 minutes. 12 men from Flint's platoon were already dead. The math was playing out exactly as the gunnery sergeant had predicted, 60 to 70% casualties. The bodies lay scattered across the obsidian shore like broken dolls. Some of them were still moving, crawling, calling for corpsmen. The sound of wounded men crying for their mothers was louder than the gunfire. Flint pressed himself against the volcanic rock. The stone was sharp, jagged. It cut through his uniform and scraped his skin. Next to him, Wolf Dunbar was breathing hard. His face was white. Not from fear, from the sheer physical exertion of running through the sand while carrying 60 pounds of gear. "Flint," Wolf said. His voice was tight. "We can't stay here." Ahead of them, maybe 60 yards away, a pillbox sat like a tumor on the landscape. A Type 92 machine gun was firing from the slit. The Japanese called it the woodpecker because of its slow, distinctive rhythm. Thud, 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 thud. 4 or 5 rounds. Pause. Traverse. Thud, 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 thud. Every burst was killing someone. The platoon's lieutenant was screaming into a radio, calling for armor support, for naval gunfire, for anything. But the beach was chaos. Half the radios were waterlogged and dead. The tanks were stuck in the surf. The battleships offshore had stopped firing because they couldn't see targets through the smoke. There was no help coming. Flint looked at the pillbox. He looked at the Stinger lying across his lap. The weapon was wrapped in canvas to protect it from the salt spray during the landing. He'd kept it dry, kept it clean. Now it was time to see if 3 months of work in a Hawaiian junkyard could actually keep men alive. He unwrapped the canvas. The Stinger looked even uglier in daylight. The
The mismatched parts, the rough welding, the stock from a Garand bolted onto the receiver of an aircraft gun. It looked like something a crazy person would build in a garage. Wolf saw it and shook his head. That thing better work. It'll work, Flint said. You sure? No. Flint wasn't sure. He'd test-fired it on a range. He'd proven the mechanical function. But this wasn't a range. This was a beach where men were dying every 10 seconds, and the enemy was invisible, and the only thing between him and a bullet was luck and mathematics. But the mathematics of the standard weapons had already failed. 12 men dead in 8 minutes. By the end of the day, it would be 30, 40.
Flint couldn't accept that math, so he was going to try different math. A bullet every 0.05 seconds instead of every 0.12. A continuous stream instead of a rhythm. Violence so overwhelming that the enemy couldn't think, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except die. He checked the box magazine. 100 rounds. He'd loaded it himself the night before, sitting in the hold of the LST, feeding each cartridge into the belt by hand. Each round was a promise. Each link was a chance to keep someone alive. He racked the charging handle. The bolt slammed forward with a heavy metallic clack. The gun was ready. "I'm going," Flint said. Wolf grabbed his arm. "Going where? You'll get killed." "Staying here. We're already dead." The lieutenant heard them. He crawled over. His uniform was soaked with seawater and blood. Someone else's blood. His eyes were wild. "Kellerman, what the hell is that?" "Modified BAR, sir." "Bullshit! That's not regulation." "No, sir." "Where'd you get it?"
"Made it, sir." The lieutenant stared at him. For a moment, Flint thought he was going to order him to drop it, to stick with the Garand, to follow protocol even while men died. But the lieutenant just looked at the pillbox, at the bodies in the sand, at the Marines huddled behind cover, terrified to move. "If you can knock out that bunker," the lieutenant said, "I don't care if you're carrying a fucking cannon, do it." Flint nodded. He rose to a crouch, took a breath, and stepped out from behind the ridge. Time slowed. Not really. Time doesn't actually slow down. But the human brain does strange things under stress. It sharpens, it focuses. Details that normally blur together suddenly snap into crystalline clarity. Flint saw everything. He saw the texture of the ground beneath his boots, each grain distinct, volcanic particles catching the morning light. He saw the way his boots sank as his weight came down, 4 inches deep, his calf muscles straining to pull his foot back out. He saw the smoke drifting across the beach, cordite and burning fuel oil, grey and black and streaked with orange from fires burning in the surf. He saw the pillbox, the concrete dome stained dark from rain and age, the firing slit, a black rectangle in the grey stone. Movement inside, shadows shifting. He took a step, then another. Behind him, someone screamed, "Get down! Kellerman, get down!" He didn't get down. He walked. 45 yards from the pillbox. 40, 35. The Type 92 machine gun swung toward him. He could see it now, the barrel protruding from the slit, the distinctive cooling jacket, the Japanese gunner inside, adjusting his aim. Flint kept walking. 30 yards. His heart was pounding, not from fear, from exertion. Each step through the sand was like climbing stairs. His legs burned. His breath came in short, hard gasps. The Stinger was heavy, 23 pounds, plus the ammo, plus the gear on his back. 25 yards. The Type 92 fired. Flint heard the bullets snap past his head, supersonic cracks splitting the air. He felt the pressure wave. Close, too close. 6 inches to the left and he'd be dead. But he wasn't dead. He kept walking, 20 yards. And then he saw it. Through the firing slit, for just a fraction of a second, a reflection, light glinting off metal. There was another pillbox, behind the first one, 20 feet back, a second firing position covering the first. It was a trap. The pillbox in front was bait. Kill it, and the second one would open fire from an angle you couldn't see until it was too late. The Japanese had done this at Tarawa, at Saipan, set up overlapping fields of fire, make the Marines commit to attacking one position, then slaughter them from the flanks. Standard American doctrine said, identify the primary target, suppress it, assault with demolitions.
But standard doctrine assumed you could only engage one target at a time. Flint had a weapon that fired faster than human thought. He could engage 2 targets. 15 yards. He stopped walking, dropped to one knee. The sand cushioned the impact but tried to pull him down further. He fought it, planted his left foot, extended the bipod on the stinger, set the legs into the sand. He shouldered the weapon, pressed the stock into the pocket of his shoulder, wrapped his right hand around the pistol grip. His left hand gripped the BAR bipod welded to the barrel. He put his eye behind the sights. Crude sights, just a post and a notch. But at 15 yards you didn't need precision, you just needed to point. The Type 92 was tracking toward him. He could see the barrel moving, lining up. In another second, the Japanese gunner would fire, and Flint would be cut in half. Flint pulled the trigger. The stinger erupted. The noise wasn't like a rifle. It wasn't like a BAR. It was a chainsaw made of sound, a continuous roar that vibrated in your chest and made your bones shake. The muzzle flash was 3 feet long, a cone of fire that turned the air orange. The recoil was tremendous. Even with the bipod and the stock and all of Flint's weight leaning into it, the gun tried to climb, tried to rip itself out of his hands. He fought it, muscled it down, kept the barrel on target. A stream that never paused poured out of the stinger. The bullets hit the pillbox firing slit. Not one at a time, not in a rhythm, in a continuous beam of metal moving at 2,800 feet per second. The sandbags around the slit didn't just get holes, they exploded. The burlap shredded, the sand inside turned to dust and blew away like smoke. The bullets hammered through the opening and ricocheted inside the concrete box. The sound was like hail on a tin roof, a metallic screaming. The Type 92 fell silent. Flint held the trigger for 3 seconds. 60 rounds. Then he pivoted, swung the stinger 30 degrees to the right, toward the second pillbox. The Japanese gunners in the second position saw him, saw the muzzle swing toward them. They tried to react, tried to traverse their gun. Too slow. Flint fired again. 2 seconds. 40 rounds. The second pillbox went dark. Flint released the trigger. The barrel of the stinger was glowing. Not figuratively, literally glowing. A dull red heat shimmer rising off the metal. The paint had burned off. The steel underneath was discolored, blue and purple and orange. He stood up, pulled a grenade from his belt, threw it underhand toward the first pillbox. It bounced once and rolled through the firing slit. The explosion was muffled, a thump from inside the concrete. Smoke poured out of the slit. He threw a second grenade at the second pillbox. Same result. Both bunkers were silent. 5 seconds of firing, 100 rounds, 2 pillboxes destroyed. Flint turned and looked back at his platoon. They were staring at him. 40 men, mouths open, eyes wide. Wolf stood up. He was grinning, a huge, wild grin. What the hell was that? That, Flint said, was the stinger. The beach was hell, but hell has rules. Hell has a rhythm. And for the next 6 hours, Marcus Kellerman broke every rule and shattered every rhythm until the Japanese defenders didn't know what they were fighting anymore. He didn't stop at 2 pillboxes. He destroyed 5. And every time he ran out of ammunition, which happened every 15 to 20 seconds of actual firing, he had to go back to the beach to reload. The LSTs were still offshore, unloading supplies. The ammo crates were stacked on the sand near the waterline, 200 yards behind the front line. To get there, Flint had to run through the kill zone, across open ground, under sniper fire, under mortar fire, through the same hell that had killed 12 men in the first 8 minutes. He made the run 8 times. The first 2 runs, he was methodical. He'd fire until the stinger ran dry. He'd pull the empty magazine off and drop it in the sand. Then, he'd take off his helmet and set it on the ground as a marker, a steel landmark that said, "I'm coming back here." Then he'd run. Boots pounding through the volcanic ash, lungs burning, the stinger cradled across his chest like a baby.
He'd weave between craters, jump over bodies, keep his head low. The air was full of bullets. You couldn't see them, but you could hear them. The snap of rounds passing close, the wet thunk of bullets hitting flesh somewhere nearby. He'd reach the ammo crates, rip one open, pull out belts of linked 30 caliber ammunition, drape them over his shoulders. 4 belts, 200 rounds, 16 pounds. Then he'd run back through the kill zone, back to his helmet. He'd drop to his knees, slam a fresh magazine onto the stinger, rack the bolt, stand up, find the next pillbox, and kill it. The third and fourth runs were harder. His legs were starting to cramp. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, grinding fatigue. The stinger was getting heavier, or maybe he was getting weaker. It didn't matter. The math didn't change. Men were dying. He had the tool to stop it, so he ran. On the fourth run, he saw a Marine lying in the sand. The man was hit in the leg, femoral artery, blood pumping out in spurts. The Marine was trying to crawl, trying to drag himself toward the water. Flint stopped. He shouldn't have stopped. Every second mattered. Every second he wasn't firing the stinger, someone else was dying. But he stopped. He dropped the ammo belts, grabbed the wounded Marine under the arms, dragged him back toward the beach. The man was screaming. Flint didn't have morphine, didn't have a tourniquet. He just pulled him to where the corpsmen were working and dropped him in the sand. "Fix him," Flint said. Then he picked up the ammo belts and ran back to the fight. That detour cost him 4 minutes. 4 minutes when the stinger was silent. 4 minutes when the pillboxes could maneuver and reposition. He didn't know how many men died in those 4 minutes. He tried not to think about it. On the fifth run, something changed. Flint was firing on a pillbox, bunker number 4, when a Japanese soldier crawled out of the back entrance. The man was wounded, bleeding from the head. He dropped his rifle. He was trying to escape. Flint saw him. The Japanese soldier saw Flint. For 1.5 seconds, they stared at each other. Flint's finger was on the trigger. He could kill the man. Should kill the man. That's what you did in war. You killed the enemy. But the Japanese soldier didn't fight, didn't reach for a weapon. He just looked at Flint, really looked at him, and his eyes went wide. His mouth opened. He screamed something in Japanese, a single word, high-pitched, terrified. "Akuma!" Then the soldier turned and ran into the smoke and disappeared. Later, a translator told Flint what the word meant. Akuma. Demon. Devil. The Japanese soldier thought Marcus Kellerman was a supernatural creature, because no human being runs through machine gun fire 5 times and lives. No human being walks upright on a beach where everyone else is crawling. No human being carries a weapon that sounds like the sky tearing apart. Only a demon could do that. On the 6th run, Flint stumbled. His boot caught on something. A body, a piece of debris, he didn't know. He fell face first into the sand. A Japanese mortar round hit 5 yards away. The blast wave lifted him, slammed him back down. His ears stopped working, just ringing, high-pitched, constant. He couldn't hear the gunfire, couldn't hear men screaming, just silence and ringing. But he could see the pillbox, still firing, still killing. Flint stood up, deaf, bleeding from the nose where he'd hit the ground, blood running down his chin and dripping onto his uniform. He picked up the stinger, kept walking. He didn't need to hear to kill. The 7th run, his boots were full of sand. The volcanic grit had worked its way inside and was grinding his feet raw. Every step hurt. He could feel blisters forming, popping, bleeding. He stopped, sat down in the surf. Bullets were splashing in the water around him, but he didn't care. He unlaced his boots, pulled them off. His socks were dark with blood. He threw the boots away, stood up in his socks, and ran. The volcanic rock cut through the fabric in 30 seconds. Then it cut his feet. But running barefoot was faster than running with boots full of sand. The pain was just noise. He could ignore noise. On the 8th run, the stinger broke. Flint was firing on the 5th pillbox, the last major defensive position in his sector, when he felt the weapon shudder. Not the normal recoil, something else. Something wrong. He released the trigger and looked down. The wooden stock, the M1 Garand stock he'd bolted onto the receiver, had cracked. The recoil, sustained over hours of firing, had finally broken it. A split ran down the grain. The wood was coming apart. If the stock failed completely, he wouldn't be able to brace the gun. The recoil would be uncontrollable. The stinger would be useless. Flint didn't have time to fix it. The pillbox was still active, still firing. So he changed his grip. Instead of shouldering the weapon, he tucked it against his hip, held it tight against his body, used his core muscles and his legs to absorb the recoil instead of his shoulder. It was awkward, unstable, but it worked. He pulled the trigger. The stinger screamed one last time. The stock cracked further. Splinters of wood flew off. The weapon vibrated so hard it felt like it was going to shake itself to pieces. But it kept firing. 20 rounds, 30, 40.
The fifth pillbox went silent. Flint released the trigger. The barrel was cherry red. The stock was destroyed. The receiver was scorched. The stinger looked like it had been through a fire. He dropped the magazine. It hit the sand with a hollow clunk. Empty. He looked back at the beach. The tide was coming in. The bodies of the dead were rolling in the surf. The wounded were screaming. Corpsmen were running everywhere. The smell of blood and shit and burned flesh was overwhelming. But his sector was clear. 5 pillboxes. Gone. Silenced. No longer killing. Wolf ran up to him. His face was streaked with soot. He looked at the stinger, looked at Flint's bloody feet, looked at the destroyed weapon in Flint's hands. Jesus Christ, Flint, how many times did you run? 8. 8 times? Through that? Yeah. Wolf shook his head. You're insane. Maybe. How many did you kill? Flint looked at the 5 silent pillboxes. He thought about the mathematics. Each pillbox had maybe 3 to 5 Japanese soldiers inside. Call it 4 average. 5 pillboxes, 20 men, plus the ones caught in the open, the ones trying to retreat, another 8, maybe 10. 30, Flint said, maybe more. And how many of us are still alive because of it? Flint looked at his platoon. 28 men, still breathing, still fighting. At the start of the day there were 40, 12 dead. But the math said it should have been worse. The math said 25 dead, 30. The stinger had saved 16 lives, maybe 18. Enough, Flint said. By nightfall, word had spread. The other platoons had seen it, had heard it. You couldn't miss the sound of the stinger. When it fired, every Marine within 500 yards turned to look, and they saw a lone figure walking through machine gun fire, saw the pillboxes exploding into dust, saw the impossible. That night, while the Marines dug in and waited for the inevitable counterattack, 6 men approached Flint. They came quietly, respectfully. Corporal Kellerman? Flint looked up. He was sitting in a crater, cleaning the stinger by flashlight, trying to save it. The stock was broken, but maybe he could rig something, reinforce it with wire or tape or... Yeah? We heard about the gun. Okay. Can you make more? Flint looked at them. 6 Marines, young, scared, but not broken. They'd seen what the stinger could do. They'd done the math. You know it's not regulation, Flint said. Don't care. You know it could blow up in your face. Don't care. You know if you get caught with unauthorized weapons, you'll face a court-martial. One of the men, a corporal, older than the others, stepped forward. Kellerman, I watched 3 of my friends die today because we couldn't crack those bunkers. If your gun can crack them, I don't give a damn about regulations. Build me one. Flint nodded slowly. I'll need help, and materials, and time. Whatever you need. Over the next 3 days, while the battle for Iwo Jima ground forward, Flint became a teacher. He showed the 6 men how to pull AN/M2S from wrecked aircraft, how to fabricate triggers, how to weld bipods, how to load magazines. Wolf helped, so did Rook. They worked in shell craters and bombed out buildings. They scavenged parts from crashed F-4U Corsairs and downed Zeros. They built in the dark, by candlelight, while the island shook from artillery fire. By February 23rd, the day the flag went up on Mount Suribachi, there were 18 stingers in the regiment, 18 weapons that didn't exist in any manual, 18 guns built from junk by desperate men who refused to accept the mathematics of death. And Marcus Kellerman, the junkyard tinker from Akron, Ohio, became something else.
He became a legend. But legends, like all men, are mortal. February 25th. Silas Ramsey died. He was on the 4th day of fighting, moving up a ravine toward a cave complex, his stinger across his chest. A sniper round hit him in the throat. Silas dropped. The stinger fell from his hands. He tried to speak, couldn't. Blood was filling his windpipe, drowning him from the inside. Wolf was there, pressed his hands to the wound, tried to stop the bleeding, but the bullet had severed the carotid. There was no stopping it. Silas died in 40 seconds, eyes open, looking at Wolf, trying to say something that never came out. Wolf picked up Silas's stinger, tried to use it, but Silas had his own modifications, his own adjustments. The trigger pull was different, the sights were off. Only Silas knew how to make it work right. Wolf threw the gun into a crater and kept moving. March 1st. Irving Rook Castellano died. He was assaulting a cave. His stinger jammed. A piece of volcanic grit had gotten into the action. The bolt locked halfway. Rook tried to clear it. He'd done it 100 times. Pull the charging handle, tap the ejection port, rack it again. But he was standing in the open when he did it. A Japanese soldier rolled a grenade out of the cave. It landed 2 feet from Rook. The explosion killed him instantly. His stinger was destroyed in the blast. The receiver cracked, the barrel bent. It was scrap. By March 1st, only Flint and Wolf were left. The original 4 who'd believed in the junkyard gun, now down to 2. They didn't talk about it, didn't have time to mourn. They just kept fighting, kept building, kept trying to save lives with weapons built from junk. But the black sand of Iwo Jima was very, very hungry. February 28th, 1945. Hill 362A. 10 days after the landing. 10 days of fighting through volcanic ash and concrete bunkers. 10 days of watching the island consume Marines like a beast that could never be satisfied. Flint had built a second Stinger from the wreckage of an F-4U Corsair he'd found near Airfield No. 1. The fighter had crashed during the pre-invasion bombardment. The pilot was still in the cockpit. Flint didn't look at the body. He just pulled the wing-mounted AN/M2 and carried it back to a shell crater he was using as a workshop. This second Stinger was lighter than the first. The Corsair's gun had a thinner barrel, less metal. It would overheat faster, but it was easier to carry, easier to maneuver in the caves and ravines that made up the interior of the island. The fighting had changed. The beach was secure. The airfields were taken. But the Japanese had retreated into the island's interior, into a network of caves and tunnels that had been 20 years in the making. They fought from spider holes, tiny camouflaged pits where a single soldier could hide and then pop up, fire, and disappear. They fought from reverse slope positions where you couldn't see them until you were right on top of them. It was slow, brutal, personal. Flint's platoon had lost 6 more men since the beach, not to machine guns, to snipers, to grenades rolled down from above, to soldiers who waited in the dark until you walked past and then shot you in the back. The Stinger helped. When they found a cave complex, Flint would fire into the darkness. The ricochets would do the work. The bullets would bounce off the cave walls and create a blender of lead inside. It was terrifying and effective. But it wasn't perfect. Nothing was perfect on Iwo Jima. On the night of February 28th, Flint sat in a crater and wrote a letter. Not to his mother, she died in 1943. Not to friends, most of them were dead. He wrote to Roslyn. He wrote by candlelight. The paper was damp from the humidity. The pencil kept breaking. His handwriting was shaky because his hands wouldn't stop trembling. Not from fear, from exhaustion. From 10 days of running and fighting and watching men die. The letter said, "Roslyn, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I'm sorry. I wanted to see you again, wanted to see if the wheelchair is still working, wanted to build you a better one. I learned something here, something important. The things we throw away, the junk, the broken pieces, they're not worthless. They're just waiting for someone to see what they could be. I built a gun from airplane parts. I know that sounds crazy, but it worked. It saved lives. I'm proud of that. Prouder than anything else I've ever done. Except the wheelchair. That's still number one. If I don't come back, I need you to know something. Building that chair for you, that taught me everything. It taught me that you don't wait for someone to give you the right tool. You make it yourself. You look at the broken pieces and you figure it out. I love you. Take care of Mom's grave for me.
Your brother, Marcus. He folded the letter, put it in an envelope, wrote Rosalind's address on the front. He gave it to Wolf. If I don't make it, Flint said, mail this. Wolf took the letter, looked at it, looked at Flint. You're not going to die, Flint. Maybe not, but if I do, mail it. Why are you talking like this? Flint pulled out the leather notebook, his father's notebook. 47 pages of sketches and calculations, the complete documentation of the stinger, every measurement, every modification, every lesson learned. He handed it to Wolf. If something happens to me, get this to Rosalind. It's important. Promise me. Wolf took the notebook. His hands were shaking. I promise. 9:47 in the morning, March 1st, 1945. The patrol was moving up a ravine toward a suspected cave complex. 12 Marines. Flint was on point. He had the stinger cradled across his chest, the second version, the lighter one. It felt almost fragile compared to the beast he'd carried on D-Day. Wolf was 5 yards behind him, then the others. The ravine walls were steep, volcanic rock, sharp edges. The ground was uneven, loose stones that shifted under your boots. The kind of terrain where one wrong step could turn your ankle or send you tumbling. The air smelled like sulfur, like rotten eggs. The volcanic vents were everywhere on this island, cracks in the earth that breathed out heat and gas. It made the whole place feel alive, like you were walking on the skin of a sleeping dragon. Flint saw the cave entrance, a dark hole in the cliff face, maybe 8 feet wide, 10 feet tall. The kind of place where 10 Japanese soldiers could be hiding with a machine gun and you'd never know until they opened fire. He raised his fist. The patrol stopped. He signaled Wolf to come forward. Wolf low crawled up beside him. Cave, Flint whispered. Big one. You want to hit it with the stinger? Yeah, but I need to get closer, need to see inside. Let me go first. No, I've got the gun. Flint moved forward. Slow, careful, each step deliberate. He kept the stinger pointed at the cave mouth. If anything moved, he'd fire. Wouldn't even think about it. Just pull the trigger and deliver continuous violence into the darkness. 20 yards from the cave, 15. He could see inside now. The entrance opened into a larger chamber. Natural formation, not man-made. The Japanese had probably fortified it, turned it into a defensive position. He saw sandbags, the outline of a gun position. But no movement, no sound. Maybe it was abandoned. Maybe the Japanese had pulled back to the next ridge. Maybe. The shot came from above, not from the cave, from the cliff face. 30 yards up, a sniper position hidden in the rocks. Flint heard the crack of the rifle, felt the impact, a punch in the chest, like someone had hit him with a sledgehammer. He fell backward, landed hard on the volcanic rock. The stinger fell from his hands, clattered against the stones. Wolf was screaming, "Sniper! Sniper up high!" The patrol scattered, dove for cover, returned fire. The cliff face erupted with bullet strikes and stone chips. But Flint wasn't watching. He was staring at the sky, at the clouds moving overhead, grey and white. The sun was behind them, a bright spot trying to break through. He tried to breathe, couldn't. His chest felt wrong, heavy, like someone had parked a car on his ribs. He looked down, saw the blood, dark red, spreading across his uniform. Too much blood, way too much. Wolf was there, kneeling beside him, pressing his hands onto the wound, yelling for a corpsman. "Corpsman! Corpsman up!" Flint tried to speak. His voice came out as a whisper. "Wolf! Don't talk, save your strength. You're going to be fine." "Wolf! The gun!" "Forget the gun. We need to get you out of here." "Did it work?" Wolf looked at him. His eyes were wet.
Yeah, Flint. It worked. You were right. About everything. Flint smiled. It hurt to smile. Everything hurt. But he smiled anyway. Good. He thought about Roslyn, about the wheelchair, about his father's shop in Akron, about the smell of coal smoke and hot iron. He thought about the stinger, the weapon he'd built from junk, the weapon that had saved lives. He'd done it. He'd changed the math. Wolf. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For believing. Marcus Flint Kellerman closed his eyes. 9:54 a.m. March 1st, 1945. He was 23 years old. The corpsman arrived 2 minutes later. He looked at Flint, looked at Wolf, shook his head. Wolf sat there for a long time, just sitting, staring at Flint's body. Then he stood up, picked up the stinger, tried to fire it at the sniper position. The gun jammed. Bolt locked open. He tried to clear it. Couldn't. The action was fouled with sand and carbon. Only Flint knew how to maintain it properly. Only Flint knew the tricks to keep it running. Wolf looked at the weapon, the ugly, beautiful weapon that had saved so many lives. Then he slammed it against a rock. Again. Again. The receiver cracked. The barrel bent. He kept hitting it until it was just scrap metal. Then he sat down next to Flint's body and cried. By March 26, 1945, when Iwo Jima was declared secure, all 18 stingers were gone. Some broke. The sustained firing shattered the homemade welds. The barrels walked from heat. The receivers cracked. Some were lost, dropped in the chaos of battle, buried under rock slides, left behind when their operators were killed or wounded. One, the original, the first one Flint built, was deliberately destroyed by a supply sergeant who didn't like unauthorized weapons cluttering his inventory. He took it out behind the depot and ran over it with a truck. The stingers vanished into the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima. They became ghosts, legends, stories that sounded too crazy to be true. April 12, 1945, Camp Pendleton, California. The official Medal of Honor citation was written by a captain who'd never met Marcus Kellerman. He based it on after-action reports, on witness statements, on the dry, bureaucratic language of military documentation. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving with Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division, during action against enemy Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, Volcano Islands, February 19, 1945. Corporal Kellerman, acting on his own initiative, repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to neutralize fortified positions threatening the advance of his unit. Demonstrating extraordinary courage and tactical skill, Corporal Kellerman single-handedly destroyed 5 enemy pillboxes and eliminated more than 20 enemy combatants, thereby saving numerous American lives. His selfless actions and unwavering devotion to duty reflect the highest credit upon Corporal Kellerman and the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his country. The citation was accurate, but it was incomplete. It didn't mention the stinger, didn't mention the 3 months Flint spent in a junkyard building a weapon from scrap, didn't mention the 8 runs through machine gun fire, didn't mention the mathematics, the innovation, the refusal to accept that standard tools were good enough when men were dying. The stinger was classified as a field modification, a footnote, an irrelevant detail. Marcus Kellerman's mother received his Medal of Honor in a ceremony at Camp Pendleton. She was 62 years old, thin, worn down by grief and poverty and a hard life. She accepted the medal with shaking hands, thanked the general, went home to Akron and put the medal in a drawer. She never looked at it again. Roslyn received the letter and the leather notebook that Wolf had mailed, along with a note explaining what had happened. She read the letter once, cried, then put it away. But she kept the notebook, looked through it, studied the sketches, the designs, the careful handwriting documenting every step of the stinger's creation. She didn't understand all of it, the technical details, the mechanical specifications, but she understood what it represented. Her brother had seen a problem, had refused to accept it, had built a solution from garbage and determination. She kept the notebook in a drawer beside her bed for 70 years. The years passed. The veterans of Iwo Jima came home. They told stories, bar stories, reunion stories. They talked about the volcanic ash and the sulfur smell and the caves. They talked about friends who died. Some of them talked about the stinger. There was this guy, they'd say, Kellerman, built a machine gun from an airplane. Sounded like God ripping the sky in half.
Saved a lot of lives.
People listened politely, smiled, nodded, but nobody really believed it. A machine gun built from airplane parts, fired from the shoulder, 1,200 rounds per minute. That's the kind of story that gets exaggerated in the retelling. The official military histories didn't mention the stinger. The weapons development records didn't include it. The small arms museums didn't have one on display. There was no physical evidence, no photographs, no surviving examples, just stories. And stories, without proof, eventually fade. By 2010, most people had forgotten Marcus Kellerman's name. The Medal of Honor citation existed in the archives, but nobody read it. The veterans who'd seen the stinger were dying off. The story was disappearing. August 15th, 2015. Iwo Jima. A joint American-Japanese archaeological team was excavating the invasion beaches, part of an ongoing project to recover remains of fallen soldiers. Both sides, American and Japanese. The dead deserved to come home. The team was working on Beach Red 1, the same beach where Marcus Kellerman had walked into machine gun fire 70 years earlier. They were using ground-penetrating radar to locate anomalies, metal, bone, anything that didn't belong. The radar pinged, strong return, metallic, 30 inches below the surface. The team marked the spot, started digging carefully with hand trowels. The volcanic sand was still dark, still loose. Time hadn't changed it. 20 inches down, they hit something. Metal, corroded, encrusted with rust and sand. They brushed it clean, photographed it in situ, then lifted it out. It was a gun barrel, or part of one. The receiver was destroyed, the stock was long gone, but the barrel was identifiable. 30 caliber, aircraft pattern, AN/M2 Browning. But there were anomalies, weld marks, rough, amateur welding on the barrel shroud, attachment points that didn't match the aircraft mounting system. The team leader, a forensic archaeologist from the Smithsonian named Dr. Patricia Winters, examined it closely. "This has been modified," she said. "Field modification. Someone added external components." They catalogued it, sent it to a lab for analysis. The metallurgy confirmed it was American. Wartime manufacture. 1943 or 1944. But the modifications were post-production, done by hand, with tools that left distinctive marks, a particular type of welding rod, a particular grinding pattern. Dr. Winters photographed the barrel, ran the serial number through the database. The number matched. Douglas Dauntless tail number 4728. Shot down November 1943. Crash location, Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. But why was a Hawaiian crash wreck on Iwo Jima? Someone had moved it, modified it, used it. Dr. Winters cross-referenced the crash records with Medal of Honor citations from Iwo Jima, looking for connections, looking for mentions of modified weapons or unusual tactics. She found one citation that stood out. Corporal Marcus Kellerman, Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines. Medal of Honor for destroying 5 pillboxes on D-Day. She searched for living relatives. Found one. Rosalind Kellerman, age 85. Akron, Ohio. Dr. Winters made the call. October 2015. Akron, Ohio. Rosalind Kellerman was dying. Lung cancer, stage 4. The doctors said 6 months, maybe less. She'd never married, never left Akron. She lived alone in the house where she'd grown up, the house where Marcus had built her wheelchair in the garage. She didn't have much, never had much, but she had the notebook, Marcus's notebook, and she'd decided it needed to go somewhere safe. When Dr. Winters called, Roslyn knew it was time. Dr. Winters flew to Ohio, met Roslyn, sat in her kitchen and drank weak coffee. Roslyn gave her the notebook. Dr. Winters opened it, saw the sketches, the mechanical drawings, the detailed instructions for building something called the Stinger.
"What is this?" Dr. Winters asked.
"My brother's war," Roslyn said. "The part nobody remembered." Dr. Winters spent 3 hours going through the notebook, taking photographs, asking questions. Then she made a phone call to her colleague at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, a curator named Dr. James Brennan. "I need you to look at something," she said. "I think we just found proof of the Iwo Jima legend." December 2015, Quantico, Virginia. They laid the pieces out on a laboratory table: the corroded barrel from Iwo Jima, the leather notebook from Akron, the Medal of Honor citation from the archives. A team of military historians and weapons experts examined them. They compared the weld patterns on the barrel to the instructions in the notebook. Perfect match. They compared the dimensions. Perfect match. They compared the modification techniques, the bipod mounting points, the magazine well, the trigger assembly, to Marcus Kellerman's sketches. Everything matched.
Dr. Brennan, a retired Marine colonel, read through the notebook 3 times. Then he did something unusual for a military historian. He cried. "Do you understand what this is?" he said. "This is primary source documentation of battlefield innovation. This is a Marine corporal solving a tactical problem that the entire military-industrial complex failed to solve." He didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for proper equipment. He just built what he needed and saved lives. They wrote a report, submitted it to the Marine Corps Historical Division. The report concluded, "Based on forensic analysis and primary documentation, we can confirm that Corporal Marcus Kellerman designed and fabricated a series of modified AN/M2 machine guns for infantry use during the Battle of Iwo Jima." Witness testimony suggests these weapons, collectively known as Stingers, were responsible for neutralizing multiple fortified positions and saving an estimated 40 to 60 American lives. This represents a significant and previously undocumented case of field innovation under combat conditions. The Marine Corps read the report, and in March 2016, 71 years after Marcus Kellerman died, they updated his Medal of Honor citation. The new version included a paragraph that read, "Corporal Kellerman demonstrated exceptional technical skill and innovative thinking by designing and fabricating modified weapon systems that proved instrumental in overcoming heavily fortified enemy defensive positions. His contributions represent the highest traditions of Marine Corps ingenuity and battlefield adaptation." It wasn't much, just a paragraph, but it was the truth. Today, if you visit the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia, you can see them in a glass case near the Pacific Theater exhibit. The corroded barrel of the Stinger, pulled from Iwo Jima's volcanic ash after 70 years. The leather notebook, open to a page showing detailed mechanical drawings. Marcus Kellerman's handwriting, careful, precise. A reconstructed Stinger, built by Marine Corps armorers using the notebook as a guide. They test-fired it. It worked exactly as described. 1,200 rounds per minute, a sound like canvas tearing. Devastating effectiveness. The plaque reads, "The Stinger. Designed and fabricated by Corporal Marcus Flint Kellerman, USMC Iwo Jima, February to March 1945. This improvised weapon system represents the Marine Corps tradition of adaptation and innovation under fire. When standard equipment proved insufficient, Corporal Kellerman refused to accept unnecessary casualties. Instead, he applied his skills as a machinist to create a solution from salvaged components. His Stinger saved dozens of American lives and demonstrated that the greatest weapon in any arsenal is the ingenuity of the individual Marine." Corporal Kellerman was killed in action on March 1, 1945, while leading a patrol on the Hill 362A. He was 23 years old. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism. Every day people stop, read, look,
Some salute, some cry. Some walk away and think, maybe I don't have to wait for someone else to fix the problem. Maybe I can build the answer myself. That's the lesson Marcus Kellerman left in the volcanic ash. Not that heroes are perfect, not that innovation is easy, but that when good people are dying and the standard answers fail, someone has to look at the junk pile and see salvation. Marcus Flint Kellerman was 23 years old. He built a weapon from garbage. He saved lives. And 70 years later, the sand gave him back. That's not just history, that's hope. And hope doesn't corrode. The end.